There are moments on British television that were so unsettling, so steeped in dread, that they were swiftly pulled from the air. What happens when a story meant for entertainment crosses into the realm of nightmare? From government clampdowns to outraged viewers, these episodes reveal a side of TV history shrouded in censorship and whispers. Tonight, we count down 12 of the scariest British TV episodes ever aired. Number 12, Ghostwatch, 1992. When Ghostwatch first aired on BBC One, it was presented not as a drama, but as a live broadcast investigation. Michael Parkinson, one of Britain's most trusted presenters, guided viewers through a seemingly real-time haunting inside a suburban house in Northolt. Audiences were told they were watching history unfold, strange sounds, ghostly shadows, and even possessions broadcast straight into their living rooms. The terror lay in its realism. Families gathered on Halloween night, believing the BBC itself had become host to a supernatural event. What they didn't know was that Ghostwatch was a carefully crafted drama by Stephen Volk, designed to blur the line between fact and fiction. Reports of children traumatized, viewers unable to sleep, and even alleged psychological aftershocks soon followed. The BBC, caught off guard by the public fury, immediately banned it from repeat transmission. Newspaper headlines screamed that the broadcaster had gone too far, and politicians questioned how such a program was ever allowed on the air. Behind the scenes, producers defended the bold experiment, insisting the warnings were there, but few remembered them once the terror started. For years, Ghostwatch was buried, existing only in whispered conversations and bootleg tapes passed among cult fans. But its legacy grew. Horror filmmakers cited it as a blueprint for found footage scares, decades before the Blair Witch Project. Today it's remembered as both a masterstroke of television horror and one of the most infamous banned broadcasts in British history. It asked one haunting question: what if the scariest ghost of all lived inside our screens? Number 11, Doctor Who, The Deadly Assassin, Episode 3, 1976. The BBC's flagship sci-fi adventure was supposed to be family viewing, but in 1976, Doctor Who crossed a line so chilling that it shocked parents, scandalized the press, and even led to censorship of its future stories. The culprit? A single unforgettable cliffhanger in the episode The Deadly Assassin. Tom Baker's doctor found himself trapped inside a surreal dreamscape known as the Matrix. There, a shadowy figure hunted him through endless corridors and bizarre landscapes. The climax came when the assassin held the doctor's head underwater, cutting just as his lungs seemed to burst. For children watching, it was nightmare fuel. To adults, it looked horrifyingly real. The outrage was immediate. Parents wrote furious letters. Newspapers accused Doctor Who of becoming sadistic. The Broadcasting Standards Authority received complaints that the show had abandoned its responsibility to young viewers. Even Mary Whitehouse, Britain's self-appointed guardian of morality, condemned the sequence as brutalizing. Behind the scenes, producer Philip Hinchcliffe and script editor Robert Holmes defended their gothic vision of the series. They wanted to push boundaries, making the Doctor's adventures darker, scarier, and more adult. But the backlash was so fierce that the BBC ordered them to tone it down. By the following season, the horror-inspired stories were softened, and Hinchcliffe himself was moved off the series. For years, the Deadly Assassin controversy hung over Doctor Who, symbolizing the tension between family adventure and genuine horror. And yet, fans remember it fondly, as the moment the show dared to look into the abyss. It was more than a sci-fi cliffhanger. It was British television discovering just how terrifying family-friendly could become. Number 10. The Stone Tape, 1972. When Nigel Neal's The Stone Tape aired on Christmas Day, 1972, viewers expected a ghost story in the grand BBC tradition. What they got instead was a chilling collision of science and the supernatural, one that rattled so deeply it was pulled from repeats. The story followed a team of scientists moving into a Victorian mansion to test new recording technology. They soon discovered that the walls themselves held echoes of a screaming apparition, trapped energy, replaying the moment of a maid's death centuries earlier. As the researchers probed deeper, they theorized that ghosts were nothing more than stone tape, psychic imprints etched into the very fabric of the building. But the more they studied, the more the darkness fought back. The unsettling mix of scientific jargon and unrelenting horror disturbed audiences. This wasn't fantasy. It felt terrifyingly plausible. Reports flooded in of viewers unable to sleep, certain that their own houses carried hidden screams in the plaster. The BBC quietly shelved plans to rebroadcast, worried about the intensity of its psychological effects. Behind the scenes, Neil, a writer already famous for Quatermass, was unapologetic. He wanted to strip ghosts of their gothic trappings and plant them in the modern world, where no amount of rationalism could save us. The production, with its stark lighting and claustrophobic sound design, added layers of realism that made the terror linger long after the credits. Over time, the stone tape became a cult classic, influencing generations of horror filmmakers, from Japanese techno-horror to modern ghost hunting shows. Its chilling legacy lies in its simplicity. What if our homes, our walls, and our foundations were haunted by the screams of the past? It wasn't just a ghost story. It was a warning that the past never really leaves us. Number 9. Threads, 1984. On a cold September night in 1984, BBC Two unleashed a drama that would scar an entire generation. Threads wasn't advertised as horror, but it became one of the most terrifying broadcasts in British history. A depiction of nuclear war so graphic, so relentless, that it was later banned from schools and shelved from general rebroadcast. Set in Sheffield, the film followed ordinary families as global tensions escalated. Then, without warning, the bombs fell. The screen erupted in blinding flashes, mushroom clouds, and the collapse of civilization. Unlike other Cold War dramas, Threads spared no detail. Skin peeling from burns, children orphaned in rubble, food systems collapsing, society descending into chaos. For many, it was the first time they had truly imagined nuclear war as lived experience. The public reaction was one of shock. Some viewers reportedly fainted. Others wrote furious letters demanding the BBC explain why such horror was shown at all. Teachers used bootleg VHS copies to terrify students into political awareness, while government officials were rumored to have watched in grim silence, recognizing just how accurate the nightmare was. Behind the scenes, director Mick Jackson and writer Barry Hines had no intention of softening the blow. They consulted nuclear scientists, military experts, and civil defense officials to ensure every horrifying detail was grounded in reality. What resulted was a broadcast so disturbing that it was pulled from re-airing for nearly 20 years. And yet, its legacy endures. Filmmakers, historians, and activists point to Threads as the most powerful anti-war statement ever produced for television. It was not fiction. It was a prophecy of what might come. It asked a question Britain has never forgotten. If the sirens wailed tomorrow, would we survive the day after? Number 8. Ghost Stories for Christmas, Lost Hearts, 1973. In the 1970s, the BBC had a strange holiday tradition. Ghost stories on Christmas Eve. Among them, Lost Hearts stands out, not for cozy chills, but for imagery so disturbing it was later considered unsuitable for young viewers. Based on the tale by M.R. James, it follows an orphan boy who comes to live with his distant scholarly cousin. At first, the house seems safe, but soon he begins seeing ghostly children with gaping chests, eyes glowing, and fingers outstretched. These spectral figures were not gentle guardians. They were victims. Children sacrificed in occult rituals by the very relative who now housed him. The imagery was nightmarish. Pale apparitions playing a hurdy-gurdy, their dead eyes fixed on the living boy. Broadcast on Christmas Day, it horrified families expecting nothing harsher than Dickensian gloom. The BBC received complaints from parents, shocked that such images were shown at a time when children were gathered by the screen. Behind the scenes, producer Lawrence Gordon Clark had deliberately pushed boundaries. He wanted to adapt James's ghost stories with uncompromising dread, insisting that horror should disturb, not comfort. But his gamble brought backlash. Lost Hearts was quietly pushed aside in later repeats of the Ghost Stories for Christmas series, its most disturbing visuals often cut. Today it survives as a cult piece of folk horror, a chilling reminder that Britain's holiday traditions could be as terrifying as they were festive. Its legacy lies not in cozy nostalgia, but in the image of dead children at Christmas, silently accusing the living. It proved that sometimes the scariest gifts the season brings are the ones we can never return. Number 7. The War Game, 1965. Before Thread seared itself into British memory, another nuclear nightmare nearly broke through. The War Game, commissioned by the BBC in 1965, was intended as a dramatized documentary about nuclear attack on Britain. What they received was so horrifying, the government intervened, banning it from broadcast for 20 years. Filmed in stark black and white, Peter Watkins's pseudo-documentary used handheld cameras, staged interviews, and chilling narration to show what would happen if nuclear missiles struck Kent. Civilians blinded by flash burns, families starving, policemen executing looters in the street. It was presented with the clinical detachment of a newsreel, which only heightened the terror. When the BBC previewed it for executives and government officials, panic set in. This was not entertainment. It was a confrontation with unthinkable truth. The Home Office declared it too inflammatory for public screening, fearful it would cause mass unrest and undermine confidence in Britain's defenses. The BBC, under pressure, shelved it indefinitely. Behind the scenes, Watkins was devastated but defiant. He argued that audiences deserved to see reality, no matter how bleak. Instead, the film was quietly released to festivals, where it won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature in 1966, an irony given it had never been broadcast at home. For 2 decades, the War Game existed in whispered legend, passed among activists, teachers, and film societies. Only in 1985, as nuclear fear peaked again, did it finally air on BBC Two. By then, it had already shaped Britain's anti-nuclear movement. It left behind a haunting truth. Sometimes, the scariest films are the ones your own government doesn't want you to see. Number 6. Doomwatch, Tomorrow, The Rat, 1970. At first glance, Doomwatch was simply another British sci-fi series about scientists investigating environmental dangers. But in 1970, an episode titled Tomorrow, The Rat pushed viewers beyond the limits of what television was expected to show. It became one of the most notorious broadcasts of its time, and was quickly hidden from easy rebroadcast. The premise was chillingly simple. Laboratory experiments on rats had gone wrong, resulting in genetically altered creatures, larger, hungrier, and disturbingly intelligent. As the episode unfolded, these monstrous rats attacked humans in increasingly brutal ways. What unsettled audiences wasn't just the concept, it was the realism. Special effects and clever editing created images of rodents tearing into flesh, scurrying through pipes, and swarming helpless victims. The BBC received a wave of complaints. Parents were horrified that such graphic violence was shown before the watershed, when children could be watching. Animal lovers condemned the production, certain that real rats had been harmed to achieve the visuals. The tabloid press branded it sick television, warning that it would traumatize viewers. Behind the scenes, the production team defended the episode as a warning against unchecked science, a parable of man's hubris. But controversy only fueled its reputation. The BBC decided against repeating it, quietly burying one of the series' most effective but disturbing stories. For decades, Tomorrow, the rat lived on in legend, discussed by horror fans as the one episode you could never see again. Eventually, archival copies surfaced, proving that while the effects were primitive by modern standards, the raw terror remained intact. It left a scar in television history, a reminder that sometimes even the smallest creatures can carry the biggest nightmares. Number 5. Play for Today. Brimstone and Treacle, 1976. In 1976, the BBC commissioned a Play for Today episode that would become one of the most notorious in television history. Brimstone and Treacle, written by Dennis Potter, was meant to be a dark satire on morality and hypocrisy. What emerged was so disturbing that the BBC banned it outright before it ever reached the public. The story followed a middle-aged couple caring for their severely disabled daughter after a car accident. Their lives change when a mysterious young man, played by Michael Kitchen, arrives at their door, claiming to be a friend of the family. The parents welcome him in, believing he's an angelic helper. But as the story unfolds, it becomes clear he might be something far darker, possibly the devil himself. What made Brimstone and Treacle unbearable for BBC executives wasn't supernatural horror, but its depiction of evil hiding inside ordinary life. The most shocking scene never aired at the time involved a violation of the disabled daughter, followed by her miraculous recovery. The moral ambiguity horrified censors. Was it blasphemy? Satire? A cruel inversion of faith? The BBC decided it was unbroadcastable and locked it away. For over a decade, the play was whispered about but never seen, until it finally aired on BBC Two in 1987 after Potter had already adapted it into a feature film starring Sting. When audiences finally saw it, opinions split. Critics hailed it as genius, others called it depraved. Behind the scenes, Potter defended his work fiercely, insisting he had written a parable about the corruption of goodness and the hidden evil within polite society. Brimstone and Treacle became a legend not because it scared with ghosts or monsters, but because it forced Britain to look at the darkness in its own living rooms. It proved one thing: sometimes television doesn't need the supernatural to summon hell, it only needs honesty. Number 4. The Wednesday play, Cathy Come Home, 1966. When Cathy Come Home aired in 1966, it wasn't a ghost story or horror drama, yet it terrified Britain in ways no monster ever could. Directed by Ken Loach and written by Jeremy Sanford, the episode followed a young mother's descent from stability into homelessness, filmed with such documentary realism that many viewers believed it was real. The story began with Cathy and her husband Reg, an ordinary working-class couple trying to build a life together. But after a series of small misfortunes, job loss, illness, eviction, their world collapsed. Each scene was filmed with handheld cameras, raw lighting, and real urban locations. By the time Cathy's children were taken from her by social workers in the final sequence, Britain was in collective shock. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Newspapers printed stills under headlines like, "This must never happen again." Viewers flooded the BBC with calls demanding action, while Parliament debated the housing crisis it exposed. The BBC, overwhelmed by the political fallout, quietly limited repeats of the episode, fearing it had crossed from fiction into activism. Behind the scenes, Ken Loach faced both praise and condemnation. Some called him a hero, others accused him of manipulating emotion for propaganda. But one fact was undeniable: Cathy Come Home changed British television forever. It led directly to the founding of the homelessness charity crisis and altered how social realism was handled on TV. It wasn't horror in the supernatural sense, but in a deeper one, the horror of a system that could destroy an innocent family while society looked away. It left viewers asking if Cathy could lose everything. Could we? Number 3. Beasts, Baby, 1976. Nigel Neal's television has always walked the line between science fiction and nightmare, but nothing prepared audiences for Beasts, Baby. Broadcast on ITV in 1976, it told a story so claustrophobic, so unnerving, that even horror fans found it hard to finish. The episode followed a young couple, Peter and Joe, who move into an isolated cottage in the countryside. Joe is pregnant, and as the days pass, she becomes increasingly convinced that something evil lurks in the house. Strange noises echo through the walls, animal bones appear in the attic, and then something begins to stir beneath the floorboards. What made Baby so disturbing wasn't gore or monsters, it was suggestion. Neal's script fused primal fears of motherhood, body horror, and domestic unease. By the final act, Joe's terror builds to hysteria as she uncovers a mummified creature hidden behind the walls, half human, half beast, implying a grotesque echo of her unborn child. The ending left viewers shaken, with many describing it as trauma television. The backlash was swift. Critics accused ITV of crossing a moral line, while others praised it as genius psychological horror. The network, fearing complaints, quietly shelved the episode from future repeats. Behind the scenes, Neal defended it as an exploration of instinct and fear, not exploitation. But the damage was done. Baby became a piece of television too disturbing for comfort. Today, it survives as one of British TV's most chilling lost treasures, a story about motherhood, monstrosity, and the horrors that fester inside ordinary homes. It didn't need ghosts or demons to terrify, just the realization that creation itself can turn against you. Number 2. Hammer House of Horror, The House That Bled to Death, 1980. In the 1980s, British horror television was thriving, and Hammer House of Horror promised gothic thrills updated for modern audiences. But nothing prepared viewers for The House That Bled to Death. Airing in 1980, it became so notorious that schools, parents, and even censors later used it as an example of television gone too far. The story centered on a couple who move into a suburban home with their young daughter. The catch? A gruesome murder had occurred there years earlier. At first, the house seems ordinary, but then strange events escalate. Taps gush with blood, shadows creep across rooms, and the family's daughter grows increasingly traumatized. The scene that seared itself into collective memory came during a child's birthday party. Balloons, cake, laughter, and then, without warning, blood sprayed from the pipes, soaking the children, their parents, and the decorations in a crimson deluge. For viewers, it was a shocking intrusion of horror into domestic normality. The public backlash was fierce. Newspapers condemned the episode as sadistic television. Parents argued it was irresponsible to depict children as victims in such a gruesome scene. Behind the scenes, producers defended it as social satire, mocking Britain's obsession with haunted houses. But the damage was done. ITV quietly scaled back future repeats, worried about complaints. Ironically, the controversy only cemented its legend. Fans traded VHS recordings, and the episode gained cult status. Modern horror anthologies cite it as a touchstone for blending gore with suburban satire. It asked an unsettling question. If home is supposed to be the safest place, what happens when the house itself turns against you? Number 1. Alternative 3, 1977. On June 20th, 1977, Anglia Television broadcast what appeared to be an investigative report titled Alternative 3. Viewers expected another entry in the network's Science Report series, a sober documentary about British brain drain. What they got instead was one of the most terrifying and controversial hoaxes in TV history. The program began normally enough. Interviews with scientists who had mysteriously resigned from government posts and vanished abroad. But the tone darkened as the investigation revealed a supposed global conspiracy, NASA and the Soviet space program secretly working together to build colonies on Mars. The alternatives, the show explained, were the only escape plans for Earth's environmental collapse. 1. Reduce the population. 2. Build underground shelters. Or 3. Abandon the planet entirely. Hence, Alternative 3. The production's realism was astonishing. Real reporters, genuine BBC-style graphics. Even the actors were credited under false names. Many viewers missed the closing disclaimer, revealing it was fiction, and panic spread. Newspapers were flooded with calls demanding government explanations. Some believed the broadcast had been pulled mid-air. Others claimed tapes were confiscated by authorities. Behind the scenes, the fallout was intense. Anglia Television faced accusations of psychological manipulation, and the BBC distanced itself completely. The film was never re-aired in Britain. Its writer, David Ambrose, admitted he wanted to create a satirical warning about blind faith in media authority, but he ended up proving just how easily television could blur fact and fear. Bootleg copies circulated for decades, inspiring conspiracy theorists and filmmakers alike. Even today, Alternative 3 remains the granddaddy of fake documentary terror, the broadcast that made millions wonder if their own government was hiding the truth about humanity's future. It wasn't just a hoax. It was the moment British television convinced its audience that the end of the world had already begun. And so, the scariest banned episode of all wasn't supernatural or scripted. It was the moment innocence and danger collided, live on British television. From haunted houses to nuclear nightmares, from gothic horror to children's blunders, these episodes remind us that television can cut deeper than we expect. Some were buried, some resurfaced, but all left scars. Which one unsettled you the most? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next dark journey into TV history.